Welcome back to another episode of NFL News on the Boomer Bust channel. I'm your host, Terry, and today we are doing a recap, check-in, whatever you want to call it, for the NFL season so far. We have 10 weeks down in the books, Thursday night game completed, of course, and just want to talk about just some of the things as we are going through this season, getting towards the end. Once we hit week 12, we'll be close to 3/4 of the way. So now we're starting to solidify things more. As you saw, I talked a lot about in the early weeks about overreactions and things of that nature, and we could still talk about those things because they happen, but we're starting to see a more defined picture of kind of who some teams are. And obviously, again, if you listen to me, you know I hate sports media. One of the reasons I started this, sports media is going to overreact to everything week to week. Everything's changing. No, it's not. The teams, for the most part, are who they are. There's going to be changes because of injuries, trades, roster, and there's going to be some, philosophical changes, but nothing's going to massively change who the team is. And so you need time to evaluate and see what the team is this season. So today I want to focus in on the contenders and kind of talk about that. Now, we have some massive injuries. You have Joe Burrow, who is out for the season now, with some ligament damage in his wrist, I believe. But the Bengals were already kind of struggling to start the year, as they tend to start off slow. And they were picking it up, but I think last week's game in Houston, some of those mistakes cost them because they definitely could have won that game easily. They would have won it by a margin. Instead, they had to try to take the lead at the end, and then they end up losing. So that obviously hurts, but then you lose to Baltimore on top of losing Burrow. Now, of course, if Burrow stayed in the whole game, we don't know what that game would have been, but he's down now for the year, and they don't have any quarterback close to do anything for them. Now, this is a team, obviously, that is not built to withstand that loss. You have a team like a 49ers, dare I say it, even somewhat of the Baltimore Ravens. Some people get mad at that, but the 49ers, teams like that, maybe the Eagles, where they're built not solely just on the quarterback being the hero. That's more of a Bengals, more of a Chiefs, more of a Josh Allen or Bills type thing. And so with they got weapons, but still with the team they got in the offensive line and the run game, the backup quarterback's more than likely not going to be able to help them out too much where they could win these games. So then you also have Deshaun Watson, who's out for the year, and from what it sounds like, it's due to a new injury or a worsened injury that he suffered during the game. I know initially people were kind of talking like he already had that injury, but at least from what I read, it sounds like it got worse or it occurred during that game. So now he's out for the season. And you got a Browns team that was struggling on offense all season, with him, without him. Defense doing well, but some people seem to think, again, this is a team that's more built like the Jets too. Actually, I should have threw that out there, which Jets is kind of weird. I don't know if I would. I kind of do, but I kind of don't. But the Browns definitely is one of those teams, especially if you had Chubb, where you would say it's not live or die on the quarterback. So some people think they can still be contenders, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So some significant injuries have shaken things up, but for the most part, this year, one of the things I highlighted a few weeks ago was the injuries. And I think it starts right off top. I mean, obviously you have injuries before, but with Aaron Rodgers going down 4 plays into the season, I think that was a good indication of like, this is going to be different. Of course, people are going to be like, it's football. And they're going to say, like, do you want a cookie for predicting there'll be injuries? Like, not really, but I do think there's something to say, hey, there's way more significant injuries than, I wouldn't say way more, but there's more, noticeably more than in the past and at a higher frequency. And so if the pattern holds true, and this might be more of a football gods, just to fill in the football spirits, what's in the air more than science. But if the pattern holds true, we're going to lose some more people. Lo and behold, Deshaun Watson's gone. Burrow's gone. Two important quarterbacks. Now Andrew's gone for the year. One of the big pieces for the Baltimore Ravens. And that adds to a long list of players who have been gone for the year. And we might have lost Kirk Cousins since the last time I talked about this as well. So add that to the list. It's been that type of year, but that really is shaking up the conversation I want to have, which is the contenders, because what happens is something has to fill F-I-L-L, fill up the space. So what I mean by that is kind of like the draft. If the year doesn't have a lot of great players, somebody's still going number one. Somebody's still going number 2, 3. Just because, and I say it every year with the draft, just because you're a top 10 pick that year doesn't mean you're a top 10 prospect. Like in general, that's just the case for that year. Some players would be top 10 in any draft. Some, it's just that year. So when you look at this year, same case with the MVP. Great case. People are trying to fit and squeeze things into the MVP conversation because there isn't one. But someone has to win. So, like, if I'm a guy that's in charge or voting or talking to the voters, I would say, well, number one, my thoughts on MVP are completely different than the way they do it. But still, I'm looking at someone like Myles Garrett. I didn't pick Nick Bosa for MVP, but I picked him for Defensive Player of the Year before the season, and he could very well be that. But whoever it is between him and Garrett, or if somebody else emerges, I would say, like, I'm looking at them, because everybody wants it to be a quarterback award or whatever, a numbers award, typically quarterbacks. And we're not seeing that, so now we got to fit something into it. And so I feel that way about the contenders, and I feel that way about the defenses. That's one of the reasons I think, outside of injuries, one of the biggest reasons I think is that there's no dominant defense. Well, there's one, I think, that's dominant, but even then, somebody's going to say, well, didn't they just lose? So offensive numbers are down. Injuries are up. So with the quarterbacks not playing extremely well, some people, of course, are going to be tempted to say, obviously the defenses are a lot better. I don't think that's necessarily the case. Again, numbers don't always tell the story. But when you're talking about playoff caliber, Super Bowl caliber defenses, there's not too many of them. Whether it's injuries or what, there's a shift. There's a shift going on. And maybe it's not new, but it's definitely a shift or should be in the conversation. And that shift is not just about star players. It's about a good group. And I said this when I had the discussion about the elite corners. My discussion was elite corners are becoming like running backs. And my whole premise of that is, you have an elite corner, that does not mean your defense is going to be great. That doesn't even mean your secondary is going to be great, let alone the whole defense. And so when you're talking about a defense, you rather have a Bengals secondary. There are not a lot of stars on there. You had Jesse Bates, who was one of the better safeties, but people still probably, a lot of people didn't even know who he was. Corners from other places. You had a Bills secondary. When healthy, Tre'Davious White was an upper echelon corner. Poyer came from another team, bounced around. Micah Hyde came from another team. And then whoever the other corner they rotated, he had Taron Johnson in the nickel. Not a huge name, but one of the better corners out there as well. But they work together in a synchronous way where they're not blowing coverages. That's the type of stuff you want. And so when you look at teams, let's say, for example, the Broncos, you're like, they had a great defense last year. And you got this big name, Patrick Surtain the second. You got this big name, Justin Simmons. You had last year you had Bradley Chubb or whatever, and you're like, well, they gotta be good. No, they really don't. And so there's other teams like that too, where it's like, man, they got these names, but that doesn't mean that it's going to always show up on the field. It's really about which teams are locked into a system that people know what they're doing and they're not making mistakes. And it's tough. It's tough because this year, again, you got some defenses that are playing well without huge names, but might be missing a big factor or a game changer. And then you got teams with big names that don't have the whole infrastructure to play well. But we'll get to the defenses, I think, in our conversation about the contenders. So thankfully we have the playoff picture that's up now, and we could just go off that, and then I can kind of walk through and talk about some of these teams. So Chiefs right now hold the number 1 seed in the AFC, and they're going against the Eagles, so it's definitely possible they could lose, but they'll be right there with Baltimore right now. So the Chiefs, I definitely think are a contender. I called them a contender at the beginning of the year. The defense is becoming like one of those groups where the secondary, and the secondary is really where I start with the edge rusher, but secondary is probably the next place I look, because in this league, especially with the flags, the secondary becomes the biggest issue, or at least the biggest factor and what you're able to do against these teams, especially in the playoffs. And you get a team like the Chiefs, where they were playing the Broncos, I believe. And I think that was the game I was watching. But I was watching one of these games, and you could see Pat Mahomes had nowhere to go. He absolutely had nowhere to go. There were no quick hitters, and it just caused all types of problems. And that is what you're looking for when you go into the playoffs. So the Chiefs, Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league. That's going to give you a chance. Like I said, the defense is becoming much more honed in. You got to give credit to guys like George Karlaftis, who is really high motor. I still don't think he's great, but he's changed his trajectory from what I thought he would be, being able to play out there on the edge. And then I don't even know how to pronounce the guy that got in free agency, but he was suspended. He's doing well. Of course, you got Chris Jones, but that secondary really gelling. Nick Bolton was a great pick. He's doing well too. And it's just overall, Spagnuolo has that defense playing to his system to a T, and that again comes with consistency and continuity, which I've talked about in the beginning of the year. So I have to say that they're a contender, because even with some of the lows on offense, you still got Pat Mahomes. Now, do I think they're the same level of contender they were last year? No, I don't. But I think definitely 100% I would say they're still a contender. The Baltimore Ravens, I've been talking about them. This is a defense. This is a team in general that I wouldn't even say overrated, because we know how it goes. They blew out the Lions. Oh, they're the best. Then they turn around and lose. And say, oh, maybe they're not what we thought. And then they have another good game. And so I think they just get caught up in the mix, just like the Dolphins did, where it's like, oh, you had a great week, now you're a juggernaut. No, I don't think Baltimore is a juggernaut. I think they're built just like San Fran is. They're a front-running team. They're a team that's going to be very dangerous. They're going to be the most dangerous. Or I wouldn't even say that. They're a team that's only dangerous when they can be multifaceted. And so some people might say, well, duh, every team's best when they're multi-faceted. Not really. So I think about a team like the Chargers or the Chiefs or even the Dolphins. Well, I wouldn't probably say Dolphins, but let's just say that's a team where it's like, hey, we got to throw it 50 times today. Okay, we'll throw it 50 times. Like, yeah, the run helps a little bit, but we'll throw it 50 times and we'll be just fine. Or I think about a team like the Lions and the Dolphins, where it's like, yeah, they got this passing game, but hey, what if we got to run the ball 40 times? I think the Lions and Dogs be like, okay, let's run the ball 40 times. And so you have some teams that will lean or be able to play whatever style they got to adapt to. Whereas like the Ravens and the 49ers to me are like, we have to be ahead. So if our defense stops you and we get the ball and we get a lead, now we get the play action. Now we get the run. Now we get to do things. Well, in Baltimore's case, we get to do things with our quarterback. And now we're so multiple that we can continue to be effective. And not only that, I would say Baltimore more than 49ers, but Baltimore's defense, they're at their best when they get to be ahead and blitz a lot. Now, if they're behind, they don't get to do all these blitzes in different fronts. And so now they're not as effective as they would be. Like the 49ers, I think they'll line up down 10 and go 3 plays with you, run, pass, and be fine. The Ravens, though, I think if they're down 10 and they don't get to like light it up or it's a run situation, they could get got. I'm not saying they will every time, but they could get got. But I don't think that's a question. You look at the 49ers roster on defense versus the Ravens, it's not a question. But they're similar in philosophy that they have to be in a certain situation to be the most dangerous. I've always felt that about Baltimore, and I feel that about 49ers too. And we saw what happened with the 49ers when they had to play a different style. Their team's just not the same. And granted, they have injuries, but it doesn't matter to me. I mean, Debo's not lighting the world up. Trent Williams is a great player and a big part of it, but it's still one of 5 linemen. So even when they're healthy, we saw in other games, they're going to be the best when they're able to front run. And that's just how those two are. So it doesn't mean that Baltimore is not a contender. I think they definitely are, especially in this year. But that wouldn't be one of my favorite picks because it's going to depend on the matchup. Jacksonville, that's not a contender to me. I don't think their defense is there yet. And again, people look at the numbers, the record, and they felt like, hey, they're this type of team. Then they went up against 49ers and we saw what type of team they really were. So I think even with them figuring out how to utilize ETN a little better and obviously getting Cam Robinson back on the line a little bit ago helped. Even with that, and they got weapons and Trevor could pass, I just think that they don't know exactly their rhythm yet. And what really showed up against the 49ers is that how can they handle trying to come back on a team with a team that's going to light you up. And so 49ers probably have a unique D-line that you're not going to see anywhere else. But still, you saw how many problems it gave them. And so, but you think about the Jags even before, it's just they've always kind of scrapped in games. It's rare that they dominate teams, especially good teams. So that defense for me is solid, and I actually like a lot of the people in the secondary. But, you know, I said before, Trayvon Walker just has not become the edge rusher they need. Josh Allen is just not the type of guy that they thought he would be or that people said he was. They're all solid, but they're missing like that game changer, I think, especially when it comes to the edge pressure. The Dolphins, I do think they're a contender because, like I said, you think of Tyreek and Tua and Waddle, and you're like, oh, yeah, they're just a pass happy. Not really. They are very much an effective running team, and it makes them very multiple on offense. The issue with them, of course, is the defense. The defense, you bring back Ramsey, Xavier, if he comes back, doesn't matter. That team's giving up hella yards, hella first downs, and they've been doing it from the beginning of the season when people were calling them the best team in the league and the Super Bowl favorites. I'm like, are we just ignoring the fact their defense has been trash? Now, they haven't been trash all year, but they haven't been good either. So the Dolphins, obviously, that's the big thing that you look at. And I think Fangio is their coordinator. Now, Fangio isn't a super blitz happy guy. And with Ramsey and Xavier, if they get healthy, I think you're going to probably see some cover two, man two type stuff more often. But it just seems like they have not really settled into the scheme. And again, you get a first year coordinator, stuff like that happens. The Steelers are fifth. I don't think they're a contender at all. The Browns, without Deshaun Watson, I don't think they're a contender at all, even if they could win a game. And then Texans are currently in seventh. And the Texans, I think they're just too young. And you could catch lightning in a bottle, but rarely do you get a first-time coach, a first-time head coach in his, obviously in his first year, a rookie quarterback, a lot of young defenders, and you be able to run. Now, the thing is, if they are able to move up to like the fifth seed or something, they're going to be playing a bad team. Because, I mean, as good as Mike Tomlin is with the Steelers, now the Steelers, I will say, with Highsmith and Watt, that changes things a whole lot. That always gives you at least a chance, much like Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith now gives you a chance, because having one person press the edge is a must. But once you get the second person that can press the edge, much like the 49ers are now getting Chase Young and Zadarius added to Myles Garrett, it becomes you got a chance. The problem is with the Browns, again, backup quarterback, I'm not giving them a shot. And no Chubb. The Steelers, you got a starting quarterback. You got a starting team. Matt Canada's the coordinator, so that might be an issue, but I just don't get them a chance, but I definitely get them more than the Browns. So if you're the Texans and you move up to fifth and you potentially are playing the Steelers or the Browns, or you end up, even I would say against the Jags or the Colts, you're going to have a shot. And so they, to win a game or two, but to make it the long haul, I don't know about that. And then on the bubble, Colts, potentially. I think Minshew, obviously Richardson has the upside, but Minshew is conducting that offense just fine. Taylor starting to fall into his role with Moss there as well, and that defense is really well structured. Not a lot of stars, but well structured. So maybe they'll get into the playoffs. And again, if you luck up and end up Colts Browns, and we already saw how that game went, I think the Colts will win. So then outside of that, no one really, well, I wouldn't say no one, because Bills, they can string off some wins. They'll get in. That's not a contender to me this year because of what's happening with the defense. Now, people want to talk about firing Dorsey. They want to talk about Diggs not being happy. You definitely have to talk about Josh and his turnovers. But I'm looking at the defense. Obviously, you have injuries that are season ending, so that's not going to change. You won't have Tre'Davious, which they've always had an issue with getting the whole secondary on the court, on the field. And then you lose Milano on the top of not having Edmonds this year. And then Von Miller's not fully back, and you never had a true edge rusher. So that defense took the biggest hit to me. And without them, it'll be hard for the offense to be disciplined enough to do what they have to do to play complementary football. So I wouldn't put them as a contender, as a high contender. But once again, if the Texans move up to 6 and the Bills get in at 7, well, then they would have to go against the Ravens or something. I don't know. But, they might can make some noise. And then the Chargers, that's a defense that doesn't make sense. That defense should be good, but they're not. And with Herbert, I trust him even without Mike Williams, but they would have to win some games. It'll be tough for them to get in. So you look at a lot of the teams that are in right now, I don't see them as contenders. And some of the teams that are on the outside in, I wouldn't say are high contenders, but I'm taking the Bills and I'm taking the Chargers. Heck, I would even probably take the Titans and the Colts before I'm taking the Browns or the Steelers. So that's just me. Then we go over quick to the NFC. The Eagles, not as good as the record indicates, but definitely a contender. I think complimentary football all around. Even if the defense, I have to believe in that defense because yeah, you don't have CJ GJ, but you bring in Byard. You really do have not only most of the players back, but you added pieces with a Jalen Carter if he comes back, and a Nolan Smith as well. So I mean, I just have to believe that they could get it together. But again, new coordinator. It might be the same system. I'm not sure, but those are the things that really hurt you because the best defenses are always going to be the ones that have been in the system for a while and everybody understands their role. And so I have to believe the Eagles could get back to decent. You got the Lions. We know what they can do offensively. Jared Goff still has limitations, though. What we saw against Baltimore, as I said, once they get up, some mistakes happen. Baltimore gets up. Now they're going to come after you. And Goff isn't going to give you a lot of second, if any, second chances on the play. So it has to be in rhythm. Otherwise, it's going to be bad. But the weapons they have, the run game they have, the offense we know can do big things. Now, the defense has taken a massive step up from last year, but they're still not what I would call a playoff caliber defense or Super Bowl caliber defense, I should say. So a lot of young players that have grown, they've gotten better, but again, it's just that time on task. I think they're still trying to completely get into the right roles because I'm telling you, despite what you think about talent, the biggest issue is the communication. When you're talking about a bad defense, it's usually a defense that isn't communicating well and blowing coverages. And so with time on task, with people who have been there, with people who understand that, that's why they play so much better. Because again, you have a unit that's in sync and they're not giving up those bonehead mistakes. 49ers, of course, I think they're a contender. Might be the number one contender for me in the NFC. The Saints at 4, that's kind of interesting. But no, I don't see the Saints. The thing is, I think their defense just got long in the tooth. You still got really good players. You got a system that's been there for a while. I just think they're getting long in the tooth, man. I mean, you lost a couple people, but I mean, people who are smart but might not necessarily be the most athletic team that they used to be. And I think you took some hits on the interior. A lot of those guys from that defensive line interior aren't there anymore. And so that's becoming a big issue for them too, where you don't really have a game changer. Like Lattimore, Tyron, Honey Badger, guys like that, Marcus, they're going to be smart in the secondary. So they're always going to be a top 12 defense. But as far as a dominant defense, I don't think they had that. And Derek Carr has just not meshed well in this offense, not at least to the point where it's consistent. Then you got the Seahawks, which is another defense that's a little confusing because you would think by, again, just the talent in the names, that secondary should be one of the best in the league, but it has not been. Started week 1, they got lit up against the Rams, and people thought it was a fluke, and it turns out it was not. And I haven't watched them super closely, but if you have seen some of the games, even if you look at the numbers, you look at scores, whatever, you know that defense could get got. And the offense, while really good, isn't prolific enough to overcome. Now, again, that's going to come down to a matchup. Like you saw with Detroit. If they get into it with a team where they could go into a shootout, then I think they could roll or at least, compete. But if you get against the right defense, or the right, like 49ers would kill the Seahawks, I think, and we'll be able to see that. So yeah, Dallas down in 6, which is interesting as well. I guess because of the divisions, which I just hate that as a seeding, but that's gonna help. That's probably gonna end up helping Dallas, to be honest. But Dallas, I do think is a contender. The defense definitely isn't what people try to say. You lost what's his Wolf Hunter, his nickname, but you lose Van Der Esch. You already lost Diggs a while ago. Even when they all were there, I told you they were being overhyped. The thing with them is they're not going to stop the run well. Now, when you talk about secondary that is working in cohesion, even without Diggs, this is a really, really, really good secondary. And so that plus the rotation on the D line, Parsons sometimes, because Parsons is not as consistent as people want to make him out to be. That all is going to overwhelm an offense unless that offense is running it down your throat and the Cowboys offense isn't responding and now they got a lead. So like I feel like Dallas versus Baltimore probably body bag now. And those are the type of matchups that'll probably get them issues. But I do think they're competitor, just number one, the time on task that they've had together as a team. Even though McCarthy's taken over as OC, you have so many players that have been there for so long, and that's, I think, is one of the biggest boosts that the Dallas Cowboys have. But we see when they play smart and when they play their game, we know they can compete with most teams. Then you got the Vikings. I'm not gonna call them a competitor, even when they had Cousins. Just over the last years, we've seen that defense is not it, and they're playing way better this year, but they're not it. And with Josh Dobbs, I don't believe in that. Not to say that he's not, decent, but people are way overrating him. I mean, I'm a fan of Dobbs. So if the question was, are you surprised Dobbs is being able to play quarterback in the league? No, I'm not surprised by that. I was a big fan of him coming out. But in terms of him being like a top tier quarterback, no, you got to watch the games. And I didn't finish, but I'm in the middle of the Vikings game from last week. And I already watched the first half, and I can tell you Dobbs got bailed out a lot of times. And so that's the problem with just looking at numbers. You got to really watch the games to know how it happened. And then he's running a lot, which is cool. That mobility is a piece that can help the team. But when you're talking about playoff run, that's not a team that I'm willing to call a competitor. And then outside at the Bucks, I'd be tempted. That defense, while still got a lot of that talent, just not playing the same. Baker, I think, is a pretty good fit with that team. I don't think he's great, but it's a good fit because they got all these receiving weapons. But the run game is the one that, I don't think is there. And that O-line still isn't the best. And then outside of that, Commanders, Falcons, Packers, Rams, Bears, Giants, I wouldn't give any of them. So really, I mean, when I look at it, of true competitors, I'm looking at Chiefs, Eagles, Ravens, Lions, 49ers, that's 5, Dolphins, that's 6, Cowboys, that's 7. So I'm looking at 7 true competitors or contenders that I think could legit win the Super Bowl, as we are right now, because we know things could change with injuries and everything. So that's what my thoughts are. Go to the comment section. Let me know what you think. Share it around. Get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for listening.